Let's close that up. Is that right? All right, let's call this meeting to order, our small but mighty group. We do have a forum. We know that a couple of our colleagues are out of town and unavailable today. Hopefully Councilwoman Alexander will be here shortly. We will start with board and commission interviews, and we have with us Jill Magruder. Jill or Jillian? Jill, please come on to the microphone. Jill is interviewing for the Police Community Engagement Board. And if you will just tell us a little bit about why you'd like to join the board, we may ask a question or two after that.
So thank you guys for having me here. I've been interested in the Police Community Engagement Board. We're really, the passion here started with Michael Brown. It's just grown with intensity.
Oh, isn't that on? Okay. You know, it's just grown with intensity since George Floyd, Breonna Taylor. You know, even today, there's news out of Virginia about a 28-year-old Black man who's pinned down for 11 minutes and had died in custody. So those incidents have moved me, right? And when talking with my friends and family about this and why I'm interested, I kept coming back to a quote by Abraham Lincoln. I don't like that man. I must get to know him better. And I think that kind of says a lot about the way I want to live and act in public in terms of not judging, having an open mind, really learning. And that's what I'd love to do as part of this board, is learn what our police officers are faced with every day, learn about their processes and the way they approach things. And then, you know, be able to ensure that something like that never happens in our community. So on the flip side of that, very much, I know I just had some strong words there, but very much respect this profession. Our first responders, our police officers, they're doing a job out there I would never do. And, you know, it's saying a lot, putting their lives on the line every day. I've got a close family friend. Her brother serves on the St. Louis City Police Force, and I've seen him just break down in tears over what he's had to go through. And, you know, stereotypical, large, tough guy. And it's heartbreaking. And again, something I could never do. And it definitely takes a certain person to want to be a police officer and help our community in that way. So, you know, in short, I could go on and on about this, but I do feel like this is a great opportunity for me to have a positive change in our community, for me to learn more and kind of act on those feelings that I have for the better. But happy to answer any questions about that.
All right, thank you. Do we have any questions,
I
Council?
have one.
Yeah.
Council member?
Thank you for coming. So the PCEB has specific slots that they have, and I believe the 2 slots that's open is some type of counselor or either minister in the area.
Okay.
Which one of those would you?
There's also a resident.
Yeah,
one.
there's a resident open.
Kevin Sombart resigned.
Okay. So which one of those were you thinking about?
I am a resident, so yep, I would just be, you know, operating as a resident of Webster Groves.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. See, wasn't too painful there. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. And you will hear from our city clerk shortly.
Sure. Thank you,
All right.
guys. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right, thank you.
And you're welcome to stay, but you certainly don't have to stay. It won't affect whether you're selected or not. All right. Does anyone have anything they would like to review from the regular agenda? I will go ahead and suggest, just as a reminder to me as much as anyone else, that Council Member Hickson Shepherd wanted us to discuss items number 5 and 7 in the consent agenda.
Yes.
So we'll pull those and have a discussion at the appropriate time.
Okay. Good.
Mayor and council manager meeting updates. So, Councilmember Smith, would you like to start for us today?
I have nothing to report, Mayor.
Knocked it off. Nothing to report. Councilmember Bliss.
I do not have any updates.
Councilmember Franklin.
I have no updates either, Madam Mayor.
No meetings this week, no updates.
Katie, anything from you? Dr. Peoples.
I have an update.
All right. I was afraid it was gonna be left up only to me. I wouldn't want that.
So a rather fun one, No Mo April is coming up and we do have the yard signs in. So Jenny Starkey will be posting information for residents, businesses to tell them how they can get a sign. So we're very excited about that and they're fun. So thanks to Green Space and I believe Carrie Coyne, I hope I'm not giving credit to the wrong person, but designed the signs and they're pretty cool.
That's
So-
gonna be hard.
What, you can't give up mowing for a month?
Stays this cold. you're gonna do it.
I know, I'm just looking at my grass growing already. I'm like, ooh, no more April.
Mhm, we can do it.
Yeah.
We're gonna try to
We can
do it here in City Hall, so
Yeah.
we'll see. The second update is concerning the ECDC budget. ECDC was this afternoon. We did adopt the budget. It did unfortunately increase Webster Grove's portion by 6.5%. So I will share some more details later, but it went from 512,000 annually to 545,000 annually. So the big jump there is we did approve 2 new dispatch positions. So the 2 new personnel.
Were they able to justify it, those positions?
My vote was no. I don't doubt the positions of some sort were needed. I was advocating for call takers. Well over 80% of the calls are non-emergency. So it's really, I do think additional staff was needed, but it's how do we right size and staff up? But regardless, that budget passed with the 2 dispatchers.
No.
All right, thank you.
I have nothing to do.
All right, then. See, I was giving you the stare down to see if you could come up with something. I do have a couple of things. The Community Safety Pledge open house is April 1st at the Recreation Center in the morning, 9 to 11:30, I believe. It should be an interesting event. So if you have time to stop by, please do. I think there are in the order of 25 community organizations that will provide information and will encourage people to take that pledge that we all have signed on to earlier. The Traffic Advisory and Sustainability Commission Working Group, Subcommittee, whatever we're actually calling them, did meet. They are in the process of doing some research on a complete streets plan and are looking at a template from another community, both taking it back to their individual commissions to get some input before they would like to speak to us about how they might move forward. I participated in an event on restrictive covenants. I guess that was a week ago Sunday. Please look for another event like that. I know a number of the council members were there and I appreciate everyone who attended. Library board met. There is a new battle for the library. Apparently there is a amendment in the Missouri legislature that is suggesting that local libraries cannot circulate or purchase anything that isn't already cataloged by the Library of Congress. Library of Congress doesn't catalog everything, so that limits what they can catalog and distribute, including what they can do electronically, because apparently that's not the Library of Congress's thing. So that's what they're working on right now. Don't forget that at our next meeting, we will form the subcommittee to select to work on the selection of our next municipal judge. So if you're interested in serving on that, please come back next time, ready to volunteer. And then I also wanted to talk just real briefly about our where we are with firefighters. As we talked about on March 7th, the city was willing to return to negotiations. We've heard all of us from the city manager and she heard from media sources that a lawsuit has been filed by IAF 2665 against the city for breach of contract. As of late this afternoon, the filing does finally appear on CaseNet. But as our meeting started tonight, we still have not been served a copy of the lawsuit, and we have no idea about what the details are. Once we receive it and legal counsel has an opportunity to review the suit, we'll share the appropriate comments then. We all are disappointed that there was not an opportunity for more discussion. And regardless of the lawsuit, we want to affirm that this is a contractual issue between the city and the union shop of IAFF 2665. It's not a dispute between city and employees. And I want to make sure that all our firefighters understand that those of us who are sitting up here absolutely support the work you do, and we are grateful for that work. And, we don't forget about that work and want to make sure that you understand, we don't see this as that kind of dispute. This is really about the union discussions that we're having right now. All right, so I think that we can move on to our topics. And Mr. Peterson, I believe you are up first. Give that to Kate in case she wants it.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members. Eric Peterson, Assistant City Manager and Director of Finance and Administration. Councilmember Alexander, at your request, we are here to talk about city revenue streams.
Right.
So I shouldn't say at your request. I think we've all had an interest in this ongoing. And as we get through the slides here, we will see a couple other things for those at home. The documents that we're referencing tonight are posted at webstergrovesmo.gov/budget. Council members, you do have a copy of the PowerPoint that's online. For those in the room, they have extras at the table. And then council members, I did provide you the fiscal year. This is the revenue budget. So all the revenue accounts that we do run here at the city. And you can see historicals 2019, 2021, 22, and then also the 23 budget, amended budget, and then where we are year to date in that line. So we may come back and reference this if you have specific questions, but we just didn't want to overstack the PowerPoint with all those charts. So tonight we're going to talk about just briefly cover the structural deficit and our deficit reduction plans, the ARP fund balance, because that's a critical piece of our revenue at this moment in time, the revenue streams of the city, and then a discussion that will really center around what we see as staff, but also whatever ways you want to go as council members. What's your long-term vision for revenue, the goals that you have for potential revenue sources, and your potential needs in the immediate looking ahead to fiscal year 24. So on the structural deficit of the city and the work that we have been doing to reduce that deficit, again, a structural deficit is simply the amount of annual reoccurring expenses exceeds the amount of annual recurring revenue. So what are those two terms? Recurring revenue or expenditures are those that can be reasonably expected to occur year over year. One-time revenue or expenditures are those that are not. Great example, a legal settlement from like cell towers. The legal settlement we've had over that cell tower is $500,000. That if you just look at the budget, it makes us look $500,000 richer than we actually are, because that won't be in next year's budget. It's not to be assumed that we will get another settlement like that. So on the structural deficit, I wanted to point out, and you can go right back to the budget document on page 45. In the budget, there is what is the deficit in the general fund, which is what we call the operating budget of the city. You will see the 3-year comparative fund statement. For the 23 budget, you will look down to this line where it says excess or deficiency of revenues over or under expenditures. When numbers are in parentheses and in red, that means, of course, that they are not in excess, they are deficient. So our revenues are under expenditures in the budget before we balanced it by $1.688 million for this budget that we're in right now. That's before we did deficit reduction when we adopted the budget. And that means then that one-time sources had to be used to fill that difference. We do have a balanced budget. I want to be very clear about that. We'll go through that in a second. But it is important to note that a structural deficit is different than a balanced budget. A structural deficit exists, and you're using other tools to try to fix it oftentimes in the one-time sense. And that's what we did in the fiscal year 23 budget. And until we really get the the structural deficit addressed, we will continue to use one-time tools likely to solve that deficit gap. So how did we balance that budget? Again, there is our structural deficit in this year's budget, $1.688 million to the negative. We added $771,000 from the ARP, the federal funding. That is a fund transfer. We added the $102,000 from business districts from the Old Webster, Old Orchard, and Crossroads funds that pays for those park services that they receive. That's an ongoing, every year we make that transfer of some amount. And then we used our fund balance savings to simplify it for those watching at home of $814,000 to balance the budget. I want to be clear, fund balance is not a transfer. There's not a fund that's called the fund balance fund that holds that. The fund balance, all your items on books and on the fund, The savings that are over what you are using in that year simply exist and fall to the bottom line in the fund balance. So as we're going through the year, we don't draw down the fund balance until we actually need fund balance, meaning that we've exhausted the revenues that we are taking in and allowed under the budget. Then we start using the savings. So the last dollar into the budget is the fund balance. Okay. So if you were to ask me where the fund balance is right now, it's not, and we have not used it yet this year because we have revenues that are sufficient to date to meet the expenditures. Now, you also have a deficit reduction plan that is in place. We have reduced the deficit by $683,000, reduced the budget, thereby reducing that deficit. The goal is $1 million. So administration has $316,000 to bring back to you in deficit reduction plans. We will be talking on April 18th. That's budget introduction night, but we also have our third quarter update and have some conversation with you about the administration's plans on how we're going to meet that 316. We're now really 4 months out from the end of the fiscal year. So how do we intend to close, $250,000?
I have one, not a question, but a comment. I would, Dr. Peoples and Eric, would really like to see some type of structured program where we can bring not a significant, but a sizable salary increase to our city employees based on what we've been through with the fire and police department. I think they're due for some serious conversations and increases in their salary. I don't know if these salary program we did, if they're up to their minimum where they're supposed to be according to their job status. But I think we owe the staff that much to make sure they are taken care of. And although we will have a deficit, but I'll be willing to go over that deficit enough to make sure that we take care of the rest of the city employees.
We just did the class and comp study and brought everyone up to everyone that was below the median up to the median, right?
Correct.
So, except, and obviously we're working on the firefighters. I'm just not sure. I mean, I agree, we need to keep pace. I'm not sure it's required. I mean, not, I guess I don't want to do it beyond the pace, if that makes sense. Because I don't see us losing staff necessarily solely because of compensation, like our compensation's less. Does that make sense?
Yeah, but one of the things I look at is that, we have staff and, they're seeing the firefighters getting a 6% increase for the next 3 years. That's hard to swallow.
And the firefighters have to look their fellow co-employees in the eye and make them understand that there's less of a pie to go around sometimes because they're requesting 6%.
And that's why I want us to take a serious look at what we can do for staff. And
I think what that also brings into place too is that we can't just create these funds to do this out of the air. I mean, we've asked to address balancing the budget. We've tasked, Dr. Peoples and Eric with exactly what we see before us. We definitely bought the city, we did the study to make sure that we bought them up. And I mean, it's just really untenable that because of what we're dealing with the firefighters, we still can't just magically create money out of the air to address.
Yeah, if we let Dr. Peoples, I think, is going to try and respond a little bit to what you had to say.
It's a great conversation. First, I wanted to correct my response to Councilman Franklin. So the comp and class, we did move to the ranges and we did bring all the staff that were below the ranges into the range. We did not bring everyone up to median.
Gotcha.
Okay.
So needed to correct that. But we did make quite a few increases. What we did not deal with from the comp and class was we did not deal with equity in between gender, and we also did not deal with compression. And we have quite a bit of compression issues.
What does compression mean?
Compression, so we're bringing in new people at higher rates than our
Yeah.
people that have been here for some years have made. So, their salaries are real close or equal, and in a couple instances, maybe a little bit more.
Yeah.
So we are looking at compression and putting a plan together to address that, certainly for this fiscal year. I am certainly looking at appropriate COLAs because you're right. We do need to take care of all of our staff. And that's incredibly important. Have not yet determined what that COLA that I'll be coming to council with, but also maybe looking at some creative things such as doing one-time stipends as we've done to not build upon the base, but also to recognize our employees. There's of course many unknowns right now, which we're not into the budget conversations, but last year our healthcare we know went up 7%. We have not yet got those costs from Slate, so we don't know what our healthcare costs will be. So looking at a variety of things, but certainly I'll be bringing recommendations for employee salaries.
Okay. Do we have two new revenue streams coming in for 24?
Not really, we had use tax came in 23, so we'll talk about that. Now,
Okay.
Marijuana tax, should it pass, would be available if a dispensary is located here. And we can certainly talk about marijuana's impact on the regular sales tax that we receive. We theoretically should see an increase there, given the volume of sales, but we have no way to track and attribute, the monthly differences in sales tax to marijuana. We don't have access to the data from what's in the county pool.
Right, please proceed.
No problem. So in that conversation that we've been having about revenue is the ARP fund balance. It's been a critical tool. It's been very valuable for the city in balancing its budget and such. And so this is our fund balance. Oops, sorry. Went too fast trying to get myself out of the way. This is our ARP fund balance. I think you've seen these numbers before. We received a total of 4.648 million. We have appropriated 2.5. Not all of that, a vast good chunk of it has not been yet spent. Appropriations that we know will not be expended, $50,000. And then we applied 771 to the general fund. So that will leave 1.4 million that will need to be addressed in terms of appropriating. What does it go towards? What is it going to be used for from the council? That's your determination. It can be, again, the things we've been involved in. I will say that number is likely to be a little bigger, and that's a council conversation because of that 2.5. Some of the things, we have a fund for traffic calming. There's the business development fund. There's the sustainability fund. All good purposes. Sooner or later, we need to pick up the speed on the recommendations and the implementation and using those funds because it's, we're 9 months into this year or 8 months. You all will have the decision on the budget. Should we roll money over into the next year for those same purposes? Or are we saying, you know what, it didn't come about, we didn't get it done, so we're moving on to the next thing? Those are your conversations as policymakers, but that could increase the amount of money available in ARP. Needs to be decided by the end of calendar year 24. So we do have the next budget cycle to close it out and appropriate it. But once we do, we get locked into those uses because we have 2 years then to spend it out. But for the uses you've already allocated it for.
So we don't have to spend it by end of year calendar 24. We just have to
No,
appropriate it.
but it's appropriate and then it's locked in. So if you say we're going to do sustainability, we've got to follow through on that because we're not going to be able to come in as staff and say, didn't work, we're putting it in traffic calming. So. Okay, so 1.4, that's a very important number and your good baseline going into the budget of what you have available from the federal funds. So now the revenue streams, and there are many for all those in the room and watching at home, wrapped in attention. 76 revenue accounts are in use in this year's budget. 0 budget, they're either in use or 0 budgeted. I'll explain that in a second. And that's across 15 different funds. 64 of those accounts are recurring funding, one of which, miscellaneous income, imagine that, has both some recurring and one-time funds that get deposited in that account. 10 accounts are one-time funding. We'll go through them all. 2 accounts are one-time accounting lines and they are not budgeted. They're called overage and shortage. They exist. You can see them in there. If we do have an overage or a shortage line in revenue, we do deposit and use those accounts. I think the big thing here is for council members, as we look at these 64 and 10, is these are your tax streams. So they're everything from the property tax down to the fee we charge to, file a building permit. And so there's a lot of difference in the revenue streams, as you all know, as we've talked about the revenue in the budget. This chart shows the revenue accounts that are one time across the different funds. So these are one time in fiscal year 23. Firehouse 2 is shown because we're still using a small bit of the bond proceeds. Now, that's not the debt payment. I'm talking about the revenue we made when we sold the bonds, okay? The general fund is using insurance settlements. So when we had an accident and we received a settlement, found not at fault and such. Legal settlement, that would be the cell tower that we just discussed. Revenue settlement, this is the last year's revenue when the county sent pooled sales tax to Brentwood and not to the pool. So when we got that back, it was outside that fiscal year. So we consider that a revenue settlement. It's one-time funding. Also then transfers from other funds. The general fund is the only fund that's receiving money from another fund at this time. We have gain on sale in the capital fund so that when we sell a dump truck, we buy a new one, we sell the old one, that goes back into the capital fund, the fund that purchased the asset. The next 5 here are the grants that we have currently operating in the grant fund. As you can see, emergency management grants, that's the FEMA money for the July 22 floods. Police grants, we'll talk tonight about the flock cameras, also other issues, grants that come in. Parks and Recreation grant, the Muni Park grant, public work grants for roads and other maintenance issues. Miscellaneous grants is really it's the recycling grant that we received is in there. But also miscellaneous grants are in the ARP fund because that's what we called the ARP revenue was a miscellaneous grant. And then I just wanted to highlight, again, the general fund uses fund balance. It's the only one we have using the fund balance this year. It is not an account, though. It just exists as part of the fund. Every fund must have a fund balance.
Eric, before you
Yep.
move on, in terms of basically the yellow.
Yep.
It has been an extraordinarily high year in terms of us collecting. At least it seems that way to me, right? That we're at what, $600,000 approximately in settlements. And the question is, and yes, probably right on the table in front of me, but you can find it faster. How does that compare to previous years?
So it is a great question. We do have legal settlement and insurance proceeds alone are at 560, and then the revenue puts us, I think, at about 610,000. We would have small legal settlements maybe come in. We have not tracked this, so we hadn't had separate account lines like
Okay.
we've created now. But just a quick look back when we were looking at creating these accounts, you're talking maybe $10,000 to $20,000.
Okay.
So I mean, this isn't this one-time money, and it's a reason we created that one-time space on the 5-year plan is extraordinary this year. So I mean, it really does change the fund balance if we want to talk about it in terms of how we need to use it.
Well, we know the tower settlement took a decade. Was it that long?
Yeah.
Seemed like, yeah,
that long, but it was
but almost,
a
yeah.
long time.
Okay. Thank you very much.
No problem. So moving on to recurring funds, again, same, this is the recurring funds across all the different funds that exist in the city. The top 5 are property taxes. So I broke out residential and commercial because you can see we have passed the property taxes, the general fund, debt fund, the pension fund, and the street fund are property tax based funds. I did want to highlight the business districts. Crossroads at its inception, we decided not to put residential real estate into Crossroads, so it collects no residential real estate. It's just commercial. Financial institution taxes, this is always an interesting conversation because it's actually not a property tax. We classify it as such, and it's an income tax based on banks that we receive. However, it all flows through the state and every year it fluctuates and we have no power or control over it. It flows through the state, but and it's not easy for us to capture how much we should be getting. In fact, we budgeted 0 this year out of the fact that we have no knowledge. We get no, past years have yo-yoed really, and it really depends on collection and how people's, their corporate taxes are being filed.
So you said that was basically an income tax
It's really
from the profit that the financial institutions in the city make that they're paid to the state that they're then funneled back.
That's correct. Yes. Yeah. So it's Councilmember Alexander, if you're confused, then trust us, we're in finance. We're just as confused. some days, 'cause
No, it made
Yeah.
sense to me. I just.
Right,
wanted
no,
to
you're
see
you're
that I
absolutely right on
understood.
that piece, but unlike the property tax, when we know, even though we're not the collector and such, and we set the rate, we have no power over the rate in that tax. We have no power over we don't see the revenues that they're talking about or the income or anything like that. We just get checks. And so, that doesn't help us reverse engineer to give you all an estimate of what we should be expecting. Old Webster is tagged there. I don't know why. For some years, we have gotten financial institution taxes to the business district. However, the business district law, the state statute says they're not supposed to pay financial institution taxes, but we keep getting them. So they keep getting deposited and we keep waiting to hear that we're supposed to give them back. So
So that is for financial institutions that are physically located.
you would think then Old Orchard, which has banks, Crossroads, they have banks and US Bank and Schnucks. So it's physical location that creates that. It's such a small amount. It's literally $20,000 in the general fund one year. So, I mean, again, we don't have many details to be able to even give you. Sales tax, we do have sales tax that do extend outside of the general fund to capital improvement sales tax, and then the park and stormwater sales tax, business licenses, the sewer lateral fee. The one revenue stream that hits every fund is interest. When we invest the money, that's why our investment plan is so important, because it does amplify every fund in the city. All the rest of these that we're going to talk about, when we just go back here real quick, those 5, really 10 out of 64 apply to other funds. We are now into, so that's 54 reoccurring revenue streams only apply to the general fund. The general fund has the vast majority of it. We have talked about these. Gasoline tax, we're seeing an increase there. The county road and bridge tax, the cigarette tax, that's falling. It's doing its job as a sin tax, if I can use that term. State auto sales tax, of course, is way up with the cost of vehicles. Motor vehicle fees are slightly up. These are our permits. These are locally set fees and permits, something if we wanted to do a review of fees, we certainly could again. And if you're looking at revenue, building permits, excavation permits, occupancy permits, inspections, the contractor registration fees, and tree licenses and permits. The sales taxes, we are as a city, there's very few options left for sales tax that we don't currently take and have not had approved by the voters. In terms of, we've got our pooled sales tax, the local option, the fire sales tax, the public safety sales tax, sometimes called the Prop P tax from 2017, and then the half-cent local use tax, which was just passed. There are a couple other options that we could look at. They all have statutory restrictions. So you're really going to be creating a new program. One's like the economic development sales tax. It's really going to put you on a path for a new program or a new fund rather than backfilling in your general fund. And most of them have what's called a maintenance of effort built in. So you're not supposed to be able to just take your general fund stuff and move it over there and say, oh, look, we saw, we're doing what the program said. They want you to keep, the state being they want you to do what you're doing and add, not simply move the money around to amplify revenue. The gross receipts, utilities have finally rebounded. We're exceeding last year's collections at this time. Still not pre-COVID numbers, I want to be very clear, but they're coming back. And so we're starting to see that. And we've had, we'll talk about this with cable franchise fees, but in general, utilities have been waging a pretty significant battle with municipalities at the legislature for the use of the right-of-way for free to put anything they want in our right-of-way. And then also to then not have to be charged for cable franchise fees for the cabling and such, all the things that we would normally collect. So important streams for us. This is an area, should you want to talk to the voters, we have not in many years, I'm looking over at the clerk, it's been many years since we moved the utility tax, I think many years. So it's been at 7% for many, many years. So
What's our ability to move it?
it's an uncapped move. So it's as far as in my review of the statutes, it's an uncapped move. So it's really a conversation with the Hancock.
I don't think there's ever been a voter approved ceiling, so I think that it's.
Are we able to limit it just businesses versus residential?
I think it's both,
Uh,
by statute.
It's not on the user, it's on the ultimate, it's on the gross receipt that's paid in. So it's a 7. So if Spire makes, everyone's going to get a bill for 7%. So
But it's all monies received
Yeah.
that get billed.
okay.
Parking fines, you certainly can look at that as a revenue change if you wish. That's about $20,000 a year for those $10 tickets. And then the municipal court fines, of course, obviously after the issues in Ferguson, Senate Bill 5, we've been very careful with municipal court fines, as we should be. I'm very proud to report that every year we file with the state, how much of our revenue is related to fines. It's well under 3%, and the statutory max is 20%. So we are not a city utilizing the court system to bankroll the budget.
Not to get in the weeds, but how do,
Can you just pull your mic down just a little bit?
how does that apply to property ownership where you have, absentee landlords that need to come to court because they're not taking care of their properties and what have you, and they don't show up? I understand that we can't even find them. We can't do anything. It has to do with, is that
So
accurate? I'm thinking of one property in particular over there where the whole back wall has fallen in. This guy's just not responding. I'm
you're letting Neil take that one.
Microphone.
You may be talking about those situations where we have businesses that own it and we can't identify the business owner. There are some limitations within our ordinance and our ability to enforce that require us to serve individuals.
Mhm.
But when you create enough of a corporate shell, we find it difficult to sometimes peel back the layers of the onion in order to get to who's there. So we've had some issues. In fact, that has been the source of a lot of conversation in the last 2 months between myself and Jen DeChamp, who is our prosecutor. So it becomes a problem because there are some limitations on how we can enforce within the municipal courts. And again, there are some very antiquated rules that are in place really for every municipal court that we're dealing with that make it difficult to enforce these things if you have enough layers that separate you from, the actual owners. So it's a problem, but we're dealing with it.
But obviously to the point of housing violations, the court does deal with them. So if our inspectors go up, you're going to refuse to cut your grass and it's too high and such, or, other violations. Ultimately, the municipal court is the place for that adjudication. And they do have housing court and they come in and can be fined, and it's just a matter for the judge to take up and adjudicate.
And in no way am I wanting to, create something or even bring up something that ends up being more onerous on the residential owners, but I just really just thinking in terms of these absentee owners that we don't seem to be able to do anything with specifically because of what you're saying.
Right.
Is there any avenue, Neil? We already require occupancy permits for people who live here. Is there an avenue to create a requirement that anyone that owns a property, something like that they have a listed individual?
So they do that. So again, theoretically, if you have a corporation or an LLC or something like that owns a property, it's an investment property, they should have a registered agent and there should be someone that you can then serve. We've been doing that. And we have a couple of different not so absentee landlords who are complaining that we can't serve the individual. And there is some merit in their argument about what's there. So as long as a corporation is a person in the eyes of the law, it's a little bit difficult to do. So that's what we're trying to figure out, is how to deal with the fiction that's been created when we're dealing with the corporation. So we're trying to look at all those things. It's only now just come up, and it's really only with 2 properties and 2 landlords. Again, one who's not so absentee. And so we're trying to figure that part out. But, and even though we know really who the owners are, we still have to follow the corporate entity, and we still have to follow that in order to get there. So it's a bit of a trick.
I do believe that there is a bill in this year's legislature that requires you to designate some sort of local agent so that you can find somebody to serve.
Sure.
I haven't kept track of where it is, so I'm not sure how
Right.
far along.
Yeah, it's not a unique problem to Webster Groves.
Yeah.
Right.
Continuing on with revenue accounts, we have motor vehicle licenses, liquor licenses, vending machine licenses. A couple of these you can control, you do control. I forgot to highlight motor vehicle fees. For those, when you pay your personal property tax, you'll oftentimes see the Webster Groves line, and it's usually like $6.50 per vehicle. There's a great example of preemption. You know, that number, so we have had a fee here to have a vehicle in Webster Groves of $6.50, was set sometime in the early 80s, and the legislature preempted any changes after 1985. But again, you look now at the growth of those vehicles in that, you know, in terms of like an impact fee of vehicles upon the city, you know, that's an area of revenue concern that, you know, it's really, how do you talk with folks in the legislature? That's an area where you're preempted from changing.
Eric, if I
Yep.
may, and that is one of the bills that's up in front of them now, is to eliminate the personal or reduce the personal property tax. And that would, if that would be on vehicles, motor vehicles. And there's some argument about after 10 years, taking them off the tax rolls altogether. That would have a significant impact on every municipality and every taxing district, like school districts, fire protection districts. All of those are going to be impacted in the revenue stream if that happens.
In the blue are, these are other things that we do control, and we can set most of the fees for: the inmate security fund, planning commission filing fee, court forfeiture revenue. Of course, those are forfeits made by folks at their bonds in the court. Parking permits, those are the permits we sell for parking here in Webster Groves. The fees we charge for street repair. The biggest line here is miscellaneous income, which as we go into the next budget, you'll see even more accounting lines, because there's ongoing things that keep just getting classified as miscellaneous income. Webster Bucks is a great example. When people buy Webster Bucks from us, the gift card currency program, that's just in miscellaneous income. When we know that's an ongoing thing, we're going to commit to it. Let's pull that out and account for it in a better, more transparent way.
Who are street repair fees charged?
Oftentimes to private streets. So there are many private streets in the city which we are repairing, and they pay fees to us to cover the cost of the labor and such that go in those fees.
So if there's like a private maintenance agreement, or if there's a cooperative agreement for owners that have access to this private street, then they together pay that?
Oftentimes it came from the subdivision that the street, St. Louis has a history, the St. Louis region, of private streets, and we have many here. Those private streets, by matter of their covenant, their improvements are maintained by their owners, they're not public thoroughfares.
Right.
Paid for by our street improvement fund. So the owners must pool, whether they have an ongoing bank account or just pass the hat around to pay for if they want us to come in and fix the curb and gutter or fill the potholes.
Huh.
On the right in the yellow are recreational fees. These are all the different fees that we do control out of our recreational program. Just kudos to the rec department. They are up well $200,000 ahead of where we were at this time last year as well. So starting to see a return there, with the exception of a couple, but nothing lagging in such a way that we're, shut a program down. So just quickly, the revenue adds this year. So some highlights and things that we talked about. One-time funds, Mary, you asked about this. This year, really an extraordinary, between insurance, the legal settlements, and revenue settlement, an extraordinary amount of money one time flowing into the general fund. 620,000-ish dollars increasing the general fund. That we should have no expectation that continues next year. The local use tax, I did want to highlight, we budgeted for 6 months, $250,000. We turned our paperwork in such a time that it got turned on in by the state in October. And so October to February, we've already collected $206,000. The trend for the year is showing up at $755,000. So for a whole year, we'll probably build about $750,000 next year into the budget, if not some more on the trend. I want to be clear about that trend. That trend is built off 2 months worth of data, because October, November, December was not the automatic collection at the point of sale. People still theoretically had to do a self-reporting of the use tax. So we've really only got 2 months worth of data, January and February, informing that trend. So it's subject to further refinement in terms of, how good we're looking over the year.
So January and February is what constitutes this 206,000
No.
or?
October to February is 206. What I'm saying is the trend, the calculation that went into the trend on what we should expect in a year.
For the 755.
Exactly, yes. In those 2 months, we received 70 and 50. 120, about $120,000.
Mhm.
So,
Okay. That was the next.
Bree, did you have something on?
I was just gonna say those months, the October, November, December were the self-report months. So that's
Okay.
why they weren't included in the trend.
Okay.
Obviously, reporting matters, right? If you and I don't have to pay our sales tax at the bill when we pay the bill, there's a lot of leakage that happens if we we go home and send it in, right? So. All right, just quickly moving into our discussion then. So again, to conversation with you all. The long-term vision for revenue, obviously, we have tax implications. If you're going to raise a property tax or other taxes, Neil's here to answer what the Hancock Amendment means and how it works. But again, how do we get to, at least from a staff perspective, to help prime the conversation, how do you get to an area where your revenues do meet the expenses that the city has? What are the goals for those potential sources? And then looking ahead, we are not, even with deficit reduction and shaving $1 million off the way expenses increase, what Dr. Peoples has talked about, we've not solved a deficit for 24 yet. We still have some work to do. So I'll turn it there to the members.
All right. Comments on why don't we leave our 3 questions up
Okay,
there?
sorry.
Well, that's fine.
I do have a question, and this kind of related to 1 and 2. I'm thinking about our strategic plan where we talked about coming up with a more clear, I keep calling it a land use rationale. I don't know what but just a mindset on how we best utilize the property that is here. And I'm not necessarily talking about the absentee owners, but is there a way that we can incentivize landowners to make their property more productive and better utilized? I'm thinking about, areas on Pacific, possibly along Kirkham.
The answer is absolutely yes. Much of that is outside of finance, but I mean, we can always model out of those things what our return would potentially be, but there are things, and I think this council's already gone down that road in some regards. And how do you loosen, not even just loosen, but just create a climate that invites certain types of use and business and such to thrive. And then also looking to community satisfaction and welfare. If you do have a more walkable, bikeable community, you are likely to keep revenue, here, right? And how do people pick up their groceries and such if they don't have to go down Watson to Crestwood, Dearborgs?
So, yeah, I mean, I think that's, for me, that is something that's top of mind.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think, we're talking about whether to do a comprehensive plan or not to do a comprehensive plan. I do think that this area, that what was it? Old Webster North, I mean, we do have property owners there who are interested in expanding, and we still have not fixed what they believe is the target for development. And so I think that's going to remain static until we figure out how we want to do that, whether it's in the structure of the full comprehensive plan or whether it's in some other way. It's been a while now.
Along those same lines, Laura, I was thinking, we never talk about Watson Road. And I feel like Watson Road, there's a huge avenue. I know that most of that property is developed, but like, for instance, right next to Steak and Shake, that thing has been sitting empty forever. And I just think that's a busy street. That's an okay place to build bigger. And it's like an avenue, I think, for the city to potentially see some gains if we were able to figure out something to do. But
I mean, we have a lot of areas that are properties that just look vacant. And if they were enlivened or cleaned up or, whatever the reason is, I think that would help get some activity going and some vibrancy and ideas and just more activity. And potentially revenue for those.
Yeah.
places. So.
Are there particular, Mr. Peterson went through all 74 different, are there places that, you all think we might look to consider some changes in revenue? I mean, we can do one of two things. We can say to Dr. Peoples and Mr. Peterson, go find us some places where we can raise some revenue, or we can give them some guidance about what we're open to doing. And I think they're here asking for that guidance.
Well, and then that's where, because of where I don't want to go to on here is any more taxes. I mean, I know that's pretty much, but we tax our people to death around here, and I know that Eric and we had like a brief conversation about Watson Road and previously, I mean, is there any opportunity for annexation around there? That's already a big commercial basically area where if there's any opportunity for something around there, when we're up around Laclede Station Road and Watson Road up there, I'm not sort of as we go over to Higgy and all of that. I mean, do we have any opportunity there where there could be commercial or extra apartments or something like that, where that's not being necessarily its highest and best use right now, and potentially an opportunity where we wouldn't have the top of not in my backyard pushback that there's a tendency to get, in addition to following up too with those with the owners and behind the last development, that they still had some thoughts of.
I guess since we don't have any large parcels to develop, we just have to seek out those small parcels that we can. And then that's where a business development person can come in handy to go out and search and bring in business into Webster.
So, to be the downer in this discussion, what we're talking about are really long-term payoffs,
Oh, yeah.
right? We have a short-term problem too. So I think, we also need to think about what are the more immediate things that we might want to think about. And maybe the answer isn't right now, although we do have to let staff know what that is. But, we have a lot of information in front of us, and if we're going to find a way to generate revenue, and I'm not sure, so I would say 100% no taxes. I think I'm like 95% there, but I also want to make sure that that whatever we do is not regressive. We can't, the people who are already being priced out of our community, we don't want to punish them more.
Right.
Um,
I'm curious about, I love that we have free parking to park anywhere. And it's, we seem to have ample parking. I would be curious to see how much money parking permits, revenue of parking permits.
Sure.
And then, it seems to me, we have a garage that it's not paid, that's free parking. Some of it's permitted parking, but I think if we've got facilities that maybe we should charge for some of these places.
Almost all of our parking is free, except for obviously the 3 different colors of permits. We take in about $40,000 for those permits. So,
Okay.
and that really is the lower ramp, the parts of the lower parking garage deck, some areas in Old Webster. There's the blue permits in Old Orchard, and then one other color. I can't remember where it's at, but in general, we have city-sponsored parking for free, obviously all the right-of-way, the streets,
Right.
the thoroughways, and then there are, the three lots in Old Webster. There's 2 lots in the Crossroads area and 3 lots in Old Orchard that we're paying, that the city maintains and allows free parking on. 2-hour parking. Businesses do a great job trying to keep, not having employees on those lots and have employees elsewhere for customers. But there's a parking study, I think it was about 10 years ago, didn't say we needed more parking. You hear some folks who say that, but that wasn't what the result was then and at that time. But we could look at a parking program. I think all of you may have heard, the legislature is looking at preempting the ability of municipalities from charging for parking on streets on a public right of way. So that a bill hasn't passed. Can't remember where it's at, but that's out there as well. And so that would, influence whatever revenue could potentially come out of that.
Is there, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was gonna ask, is there any land that we can sell? Is there any assets?
I think you've talked about and I'll certainly turn to Dr. Peoples, you've talked about the housing, the lots for potential housing, that are out there. Short of moving into a larger sale of lands and whatever deed restrictions, and I'm, take your pick of a park, right? That's really, I think, where you're at next, because we don't have many large parcel holdings that we're, and that's really one time, and that's gonna buy you a couple years, but.
Yeah. And that's why, because I totally get that, some of what we're saying is a long term, what have you, but I don't think we can not talk about long term, because
Oh,
that's
no.
what that whole development was gonna be. I think, what was it, like 23 or 26 years before the TIF was paid off and we'd start really seeing, and
Yeah, I just wanted to remind us that I agree, long-term is important, but that we also do have short-term
Absolutely.
needs.
Totally.
Then
But
go
I
ahead.
think that's one of the things we have to identify,
can we
all
get some
the
marijuana
potential,
dispensaries?
then label them short-term, long-term,
Mhm.
not only for, this, for the city right now, what it's gonna look like in, 7 to 10 years from now.
Well, and as I recall with the TIF, it was only like 3 or 4 years where we would start getting revenue. It wasn't after 24 years. We would start seeing those results fairly quickly.
Yeah, you see some of those taxes come back
Right
sooner,
away.
but the
Yeah.
full payoff is not until it's paid off.
Yeah.
So
So what about, let's talk about potential revenue needs for FY 24. I mean, one of the things certainly that I see is that we, in my mind, should look at using some of those ARP funds for revenue replacement, a smaller amount than we did this last time, but if we're moving on a slope, let's ratchet down a little bit, but especially if we're talking about compensating our employees, COLAs, we're going to need some of that revenue in my mind. So that'd be one statement I'd make in response to number 3. I don't know what other people think.
I agree. It makes sense. I mean, we're fortunate that we have it, so.
Yeah. Yep.
Use it as we continue to build our long-term
Right.
plan.
Well, we're behind schedule as usual on work session times. So I guess I'm going to ask all of us, council members here, I'm not sure that we really did a very good job of answering these 3 questions in the level of specificity that maybe would be helpful for staff. So please give this some more thought and certainly be in direct contact with Dr. Peoples and Mr. Peterson about this. We do have right now, I believe Director Mara Perry is on the line. And we're going to let her do her presentation for us. I believe that Mara actually has a presentation without slides. For
Madam Mayor, I think she has one slide.
Oh, so close.
We were close.
I'm just teasing, Mara.
She may have left us.
I'm here. It mutes when it switches me over to panelist, so I didn't hear what anyone said.
Laura was just commenting on the fact that we might not have had any slides from you, and then she was disappointed to learn that we had one slide.
I was just joking. All right, please go ahead.
So this was just, you have 2 upcoming public hearings and they're unusual. So we wanted to give you just a quick peek at them, just to make sure that you knew kind of if you wanted to ask them additional questions ahead of time that you could. So the first one is going to be Crossroads Planned Commercial District, which is 8720 through 8780 Big Bend Boulevard. This was a rezoning that the city initiated back in 1998 with an approved ordinance in 1999. The focus was primarily on the eastern property. 8720 at the time hadn't been constructed, but the ordinance was developed in such a way that it wasn't as specific in the way that we try to write our ordinances today. So it has some issues with the way that the code was written and the way the ordinance was written, that it makes it a little bit hard for it to be able to continue to work today. So we're going to bring that before the council at the next meeting. The uses need to be updated so that it meets the current code sections. And there's some other language that we're going to update. We did go ahead and meet with the Crossroads Tax District to also give them a heads up. And there will be letters going out to all the property owners as well as anyone within 185 feet of the district. So we'll be addressing all of that at a public hearing at the next council meeting.
Okay. You're muted now.
Sorry. The
Okay.
second one, I went to try to change the slide and realized I didn't have to change the slide. So the second one is going to be at the next council meeting after that. We are going to do an amendment that really is just the red text essentially that you're seeing before you. We are going to do an amendment to the Architecture Review Board section that is going to address dealing with solar panels. And at the same time, we're going to potentially propose an amendment to also remove from the historic district guidelines the prohibition on solar panels on the front elevations of structures. This would impact 4 of our historic districts: Old Webster, Marshall Place, Webster Park, and Central Webster. And just so you know, the mailing for this is probably going to be about 700 letters to address every property owner in those 4 districts. So if there are questions leading up to that, that'll be the second meeting in April for a public hearing.
Great, thank you. Does anyone have questions for Mara at this point? All right, thank you, Mara. I appreciate the preview, and we will look for those things coming up.
Thanks, Mara.
Thanks.
All right, I seem to have lost my agenda, but I'm pretty sure that next is appointments to boards and commissions. Jill Magruder has applied to the Police Community Engagement Board. Would we like to appoint her to the residence lot?
Yes.
Yes, please.
All right, we will do that. We are a little bit behind schedule, but we need to do a quick closed session, and we'll actually move ourselves this time so that people can stay where they are, since it's going to just be quickly. So Pam, do you have a motion for us, please?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to request a closed session based on negotiated contract, Missouri statute 610.021, open parens, 12, closed parens.
Do I have a second?
Second.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Councilmember Richardson and Hickson Shepherd are absent.
All right, we're just going to head into the city. Thank you all for your patience. Appreciate it. One of these days we'll get a work session done in the right amount of time. All right. We'll call this meeting to order. Welcome to the regular meeting of the City Council. We welcome questions, ideas, and comments from persons in attendance. Members of the audience may, however, comment only when recognized by the mayor pro tem. We ask the comments to be limited to 3 minutes in order to complete the agenda within a reasonable time. If you are on Zoom and you would like to make a public comment, you can use the raise your hand function to do so, and you will be called on. Comments concerning items not on the agenda should be made during the remarks of visitors of the agenda, and that is going to be right after we do a few proclamations and recognitions during this meeting tonight. And we will start with the roll call.
Yes,
Oh,
Mayor.
excuse me, I forgot one thing. If you would like to make a public comment against the wall behind the gentleman there are speakers cards. If you'll fill out a speaker card, please. I can then call on you during the time for public comments. All right, thank you.
Mayor Arnold,
Here.
Councilmember Bliss.
Here.
Councilmember Franklin.
Here.
Councilmember Smith,
Here.
Councilmember Alexander.
Here.
Councilmember Richardson is absent. Councilmember Hickson Shepherd is absent as well.
All right, we're going to start off with 2 proclamations tonight. One is a very special proclamation honoring Webster Groves Police Officer Jacob Frederick Bush. And I know that Rhonda Karsten, thank you. I wasn't sure. Thank you for being in the front row. I'm going to first read the proclamation. We're going to hear from the chief and Captain Perks, and then I know that you have an important event to take place right here. And just so you know, so I don't forget to give it to you, I did share with State Representative Joseph Dahl this anniversary, and she has provided a proclamation as well. I'm not going to read her proclamation, but it's framed and ready for you. It's a little bit repetitive from the cities, but she wanted to recognize Officer Bush as well, certainly. All right, so whereas the 100th anniversary of the tragic and untimely death of police officer Jacob Frederick Bush, the first and only police officer to be killed in the line of duty in the city of Webster Groves, fell on March 11th, 2023. And whereas Officer Bush served as a police officer with the Webster Groves Police Department for 11 years and was fatally shot when he and his partner interrupted a burglary in process. Despite being wounded, Officer Bush returned fire, emptying his revolver. And whereas Officer Bush was survived by his wife, Rose Bush, and his 6 children, and whereas Officer Bush was a true hero protecting the residents of Webster Groves, and this year, Special Order 23-02 was issued by Chief Dale Curtis to continue to honor and remember Officer Bush for his sacrifice to our community. And whereas on this date, the beloved family of Officer Bush returns his badge to the Webster Groves Police Department to honor and care for it in perpetuity. Now, therefore, I, Laura Arnold, Mayor of the City of Webster Groves, on behalf of the entire City Council, wish to honor and remember Police Officer Jacob Frederick Bush, and do hereby proclaim Friday, March 21st, 4th, 2023, as a day of remembrance for Police Officer Jacob Frederick Bush in the City of Webster Groves. Let the chief here speak for a moment, and then I know Captain Perks, you have some.
Recently here, new purpose, first is to recognize sacrifice and as well, certainly was something that started anything, started. Of course, the community that was talking about. Then 100 years, hopefully, the second part of this presentation becomes the first to make sure that his badge, photo, is going to be here in another year. So we very much appreciate being here. This point with Kevin Burks, you take over. We'll go ahead and put the badge. Absolutely. Thank you, Chief.
Yes. Tom, come on down here.
First, I'd just like to say thank you, Ron, for this. Just give everybody a little bit of a backstory. About 10 years ago, Sergeant Tom Boring and I got in touch with Rhonda, and we started this journey. We had found out that she was in possession of Jacob's badge. And thanking the chief, because Tom and I are wearing the memorial badge that the department will be wearing for the next year in honoring Jacob Bush for the next year for that. So over the course of the last decade, we've been working with Rhonda and trying to figure out how to bring Jacob's badge home. And kind of gets it's kind of an honor for us to do that. But Tom is our department historian, and he has worked diligently on this as well. And we put it together to mark this 100th anniversary of Jacob's Bush's untimely death in the line of duty. And so that's where we're at today. So we thank you all for being here. We thank Rhonda for this. We really thank you for bringing Jacob's Bush back home. Well, Tom is going to put together his badge is going to be put in a shadow box with an American flag, a picture of Jake, and it's going to be hung in the PD for all members of the PD to see that every day when we come to the department to see that. So, and on that note, I want to turn it over to Rhonda because I know you have some words to say, and we have that.
I do. Forgive me, I'm not good at public speaking. So what happened was, when I was a baby, my mom got divorced. Martha, Jake's daughter, was a friend of the family. She started taking care of me. And we were devoted to each other for 50 years. So I grew up with Jake's family. They were all my aunts, even though I'm not related. When Martha passed away a few years ago, I found a box in her closet in the home in Glendale. And I saw these papers, and on top of all the papers and newspaper clippings, which I brought today, was a badge. And I had heard my whole life, she wasn't dramatic about it. I mean, this is Martha Bush, Webster Girls High School class of 37. They're not dramatic, you know, she always just told me, Daddy was killed. Daddy was killed, and she talked about her family, but you know, she didn't dwell on it. So anyway, I knew about that. I opened this box, and there's a badge, and I thought, oh my God. That's Jake's badge. I call him Jake because they call him Jake. And anyway, so that's what happened. I have one story to lighten the mood that I just have to tell you guys. In 2005, my husband and I went to, what's it called, the field in Webster? I don't know Webster. The football field. Thank you, Mossfield. It's a cold May rainy day for our son's graduation. Here's Martha Bush Armstrong, Jake's daughter, at 86. She's got her walker on the gravel, and it's cold and nasty, but she's not gonna miss this graduation. She's 86 years old. I knew Officer Todd Smith, if you all knew him, and he was at the gate, and he grabbed two police officers, and he goes, and we were family friends. He goes, that's Jacob Bush's daughter. Put her in the stands, and she was a game girl. She thought that was hilarious. They picked her up in her walker, and they carried her up into the stands for the graduation, and she's laughing, and she just couldn't believe they were making a fuss over her. So I just wanted to say, when I think of the Webster Girl Scouts, that's how I think of them. We love them. They're amazing. That was unexpected. It was just great. So anyway, end of speech. They're gonna do an article about Jake in the Webster Kirkwood Times if you want to hear more about the history. So I want to thank Greg Parks, Mayor Arnold, for letting us do this in a public way, because I think a lot of the residents of Webster don't know about this because it was 100 years ago. Tom Dory really put together the memorial badges, the bench, the Lions Club, the police officers association, whatever it's called. Anyway, I'm probably forgetting people, so I know it's a long night, so I just thank you all for being here, and there you go.
We're done.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you very much. Take care of that sound. That shadow walk. Thank you, Mayor.
Okay, so I love women's history, but I'm not quite sure this can follow that. We have one more proclamation for Women's History Month. Whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background have made historic contributions to the growth and strength of our nation in countless recorded and unrecorded ways, and they have played and continue to play critical economic, cultural, and social roles in every sphere of life of the nation by constituting a significant portion of the labor workforce inside and outside of the home. Whereas American women have played a unique role throughout the history of the nation by providing the majority of the volunteer labor force of the nation, and American women were particularly important in the establishment of early charitable, philanthropic, and cultural institutions in our nation. And whereas American women of every race, class, and ethnic background served as early leaders in the forefront of every major progressive social change movement. And whereas American women have served our country courageously in the military and been leaders not only in securing their own rights of suffrage and equal opportunity, but also in the abolitionist movement, the emancipation movement, the industrial labor movement, the civil rights movement, and other movements, especially the peace movement, which creates a more fair and just society for all. Whereas the city of Webster Grove celebrates the women whose courage, grit, and perseverance have contributed to all aspects of our society, and Congress passed legislation in 1981, which authorized and requested the President of the United States to proclaim the week beginning March 7th, 1982 as Women's History Week. And in 1987, the Congress passed a law which designated the month of March 1987 as Women's History Month. Now, therefore, I, Laura Arnold, Mayor of the City of Webster Groves, on behalf of the entire City Council, hereby proclaim March 2023 as Women's History Month in the City of Webster Groves, and thank all the women in this country and our community for all their contributions to our society. Thank you all one last time for anyone who might have been a late arrival, although I don't know that you'd make it into the room. There are speaker cards available if you would like to make a public comment. We will begin with, and when you come forward, if you'll state your name and your address, and please try and speak into the microphone. We will begin with those in the room. Mr. Mike Peters is first.
Thank you. Good evening. For the record, I am Mike Peters, a former fire department employee of 16 years, as well as the shop steward tasked with renegotiating the recently vacated collective bargaining agreement. I'm here tonight in response to false claims of bad faith bargaining. These claims are untrue, meant to be misleading, and are offensive to me, union members, and Local 2665. Tonight, I have with me several documents to submit for the record to dispute these claims and to show what was really going on behind closed doors. From day one, the city has had one agenda: reduce overtime at all costs. During negotiations, the union stance has remained to keep a minimum of 4 firefighters on each truck, and it was a priority for the citizens and for the safety of the firefighters. Nevertheless, I submitted no less than 4 financial offers that included changes in minimum staffing if overtime expenditures begin to spiral out of control. These offers included quarterly and semi-annual assessments of overtime expenditures, with options to temporarily lower minimum staffing. This would allow for budget overtime funds to catch up with real-time expenditures, with the goal of staffing all the fire trucks with 4 as often as possible, but keeping the city's financial needs in mind. All of these were rejected. At no time did the shop feel the city had any willingness to compromise under this topic. Compromise. That's the collective part of collective bargaining. Your robust compensation plan you're forcing on these union members and are so proud of is actually far less desirable than the previous compensation guidelines in the CBA that you walked away from. Inflation, increased employee insurance costs, you stripping contractually obligated performance pay raises, the taking away of contractually obligated sick time payouts, and now lost overtime income can't be made up by one-time $1,000 tax stipend and longevity pay, which, by the way, only applies to 9 out of 33 firefighters. The 6% raise you boast about are step raises. Police and fire don't start at top pay. It takes a quarter of a Webster Groves firefighter's career to reach top pay, or what you're willing to call fair market value for a firefighter paramedic. This 6% increase is necessary to move the newer employees through the range, but you use it as a number to pump up your new compensation package, which, by the way, compensation is still a mandatory part of bargaining. Every council member in here, including the mayor, has asked for, received union endorsements, campaign contributions, and manpower for your initial campaigns. And then the 3 of you wondered why not a single incumbent was supported by police and fire last April. The writing was on the wall. Congratulations, this administration has been able to show the citizens what firefighter safety and the overall safety of the citizens of Webster Groves is worth to you: a little over $300,000.
Continue. Mr. Youngblood.
Good evening, council. I'm here this evening on behalf of the IFF.
I'm sorry to
I
interrupt, but
apologize.
we know you, but
Yeah.
not everyone else.
John
does.
Youngblood, I'm the 4th District Vice President for Local 2665. I'm here on behalf of the IFF and the Webster Groves firefighters as a result of your decision to terminate the contract over false claims of bad faith bargaining by the union. I take these accusations very seriously and personally. The shop leadership and myself have met consistently with the city in an effort to find common ground on minimum staffing, the topic in which the city asked for flexibility and options to reduce overtime. As Mike mentioned, the union provided numerous proposals on this, all in good faith with the sincere intent to find common ground and reach an agreement. However, the city gave the union an ultimatum, a last, best, and final offer, an offer which contained absolute necessities that reduced staffing, which reduced our safety and the residents' safety. Within that offer, there were 12 bullet point items, as well as an inclusive CBA to which the city stated, and I quote, "Every issue between the city and the union has been fully discussed." During the course of negotiations, many articles of the contract had been discussed, but not every issue as the city would claim. Despite that, the union accepted 10 of the 12 items in that proposal. The one key item we did not accept was the proposal on minimum staffing, to which we again gave a counter proposal of hiring a floater, doing paramedic only, and including stopgaps to keep the overtime budget in check. The union desired to continue bargaining on the topics that had not yet been discussed, but the city claimed both parties were at an impasse, and the city accused the union of bad faith bargaining. To be clear, the union desired to continue negotiations. The desire was made public by the mayor in the last council meeting, to which she informed the council of our conversation, where I requested the city return to the bargaining table. Despite that, the city terminated the contract and implemented their own terms. The city has put a price tag on safety. This act is substantiated by the recent issue of the fire truck being out of service at Station 2 for 6 days. Mayor Arnold said the city would take steps to ensure this never happened again, only for it to occur less than a week later when the city's only ambulance would be out of service. I called City Manager Peoples when this happened. I advised her of our concerns as well as the contract language, which reads exactly as this: the Webster Groves Fire Department shall regularly operate at a minimum 2 pieces of frontline fire suppression apparatus, 1 frontline EMS unit, and 1 frontline ship battalion chief at all times. The city manager informed me I was misinterpreting this language and that the city was not violating the contract and would not borrow an ambulance. I advised her the union would be filing a grievance, as this issue is greater than a dispute over contract language, but an issue of public safety. Within a short time, I received a text message that the city would in fact be borrowing a mutual aid ambulance. I don't enjoy
Okay.
filling out grievances. I'm almost done.
Would you like to submit the rest of the statement for?
I would like to read it, please. I'm almost done.
1 minute.
I got a text message that you guys would be borrowing an ambulance. I don't enjoy filling out these grievances, and you may not agree with me on contract language, but you cannot dispute these actions jeopardize public safety. How long would the city have gone without a fire truck and an ambulance if the union and the residents of Webster did not voice concern over these issues? Your disdain for public and life safety is very evident. Mayor Arnold, you sit on the St. Louis County Fire Standards Commission. Their mission is to ensure the safety and well-being of our citizens and firefighters. Everything that has transpired in Webster Groves goes against the sole purpose and existence of the commission you have been appointed to. The city has a record of violating the CBA. This is not only the union's opinion, but just yesterday, an arbitrator ruled in favor of the union that the city violated the contract. And now you have to back pay performance pay and reinstate the sick leave benefits that were taken away, a clear violation of the contract. The city has recently produced a lot of propaganda criticizing the union. These actions, along with the unsupportable claims of regressive service and bad faith bargaining, have fractured our trust. The union remains committed in our efforts to promote the well-being and safety of our membership, and we will do everything within our legal rights to pursue this unlawful action by the city.
Thank hopefully I'm reading this right. Mr. Tato?
Michael Hurtado, I live at 1479 Crossbrook. I'm also a local 2665 member. Just want to let you all know that I'm appalled with each and every one of you. When you enter a contract, you abide by and you honor it. If you do not, the courts will rule. And that was evident yesterday in arbitration. How much money is the city going to spend on lawsuits and arbitration? I can answer that. As much as the city manager and the city council wants. The arrogance of you so-called leaders and city manager is embarrassing to me as a resident. Get your heads out of the sand and listen to what our first responders and residents want and deserve. Put your egos aside and treat these men and women with the respect that they deserve. I will let you know that Local 2665 does stand in solidarity.
The online comments. All right, then we will move on to new business. Do we have new business from any council members, city manager, city clerk?
No, ma'am.
All right, we will then move on to additional new business. Councilmember Alexander, could you call for the first, second, and third reading of Bill number 9220?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to call for the first, second, and third and final reading of Bill number 9220.
Second.
Bill 9220, first reading, an ordinance defining the pay grades of the classified and unclassified service of the city of Webster Groves, fixing the compensation for employees in said classifications, and repealing ordinance 9192.
All right, any questions, discussion? Let's go ahead and have the second reading, please.
Bill 9220, second reading, an ordinance defining the pay grades of the classified and unclassified service of the city of Webster Groves, fixing the compensation for employees in said classifications, and repealing ordinance 9192.
Right, Councilmember Franklin, I believe you have a motion.
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to call for a third and final reading of bill number 9220. And the compelling reason is the need to improve the new salaries as soon as possible, so our firefighters can be paid.
Second.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes. Councilmember Bliss, could you call for the first and second reading of Bill 9221?
We need the third and final.
Oh,
reading of
sorry.
9220, yes.
Getting ahead of ourselves
That's right.
here. Only two votes on this one. Is there further discussion of the amended bill? Or the third bill, third reading?
Third reading.
I'll get this right.
Mhm.
No, well, let's have that vote then, please.
Did
But no, you have to read it again. Gotcha.
Bill 9220, third and final reading. An ordinance defining the pay grades of the classified and unclassified service of the city of Webster Groves, fixing the compensation for employees in said classifications, and repealing ordinance 9192.
Now we're ready for this.
Yes. Councilmember Franklin,
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Right, you want to go ahead and do.
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for the first and second reading of bill number 9221.
Second.
Bill 9221, first reading, an ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, authorizing the city to participate in the Missouri Firefighters Critical Illness Trust and Pool, and further authorizing the city manager to execute such documents as may be necessary for the city's participation therein.
Are there questions or discussion? All right, let's have the second reading, please.
Bill 9221, second reading, an ordinance of the city of Webster Groves, Missouri, authorizing the city to participate in the Missouri Firefighters Critical Illness Trust and Pool, and further authorizing the city manager to execute such documents as may be necessary for the city's participation therein.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have anything to remove from the consent agenda?
Well, we're going to remove 5 and 7.
Yeah, number 5 and number 7. All right, so that's resolution 2023-13 and resolution 2023-10.
Do we need a motion for that? or-
Yeah, you need to move for that, please.
Mayor, I'd like to make a motion to remove item number 5, substitute resolution 2023-13, and number 7, resolution 2023-10 from the consent agenda.
Second.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Won't be approving. Now it's consent agenda.
No, we're gonna talk, would you like us to go ahead and approve the consent agenda first?
Why don't you do that?
Yeah, why don't we
first,
do
and
that?
then
So
you
we,
can,
okay.
Take those up separately.
All right, then yes. Councilmember Smith.
I'd like to make a motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith.
Yes.
All right. So Councilmember Alexander, could you call for the consideration of resolution 2023-13, please?
Yes, Mayor, I would like to call for the consideration of resolution number 2023
Yes, you're 13.
and 13, 2023-13, sorry.
Second.
All right.
You're fine. Just vote on the resolution.
Yeah, we're gonna have a little discussion first. Chief, would you mind coming to the microphone just for a minute? And if you wouldn't mind giving a brief just description of what this resolution does, please.
Sure. I prepared a memo and hopefully you all got the memo in your packet with an explanation also with an attachment. Basically what we're recommending is a purchase, a contract purchase from Flock Cameras for 6 cameras that we would like to put at the major intersections coming into the city. And the sole purpose of the cameras is to detect stolen license plates or plates from cars that have been involved in the commission of a felony. The cameras will not have any software facial recognition. They won't identify any personal individual information. It's a proprietary system. All the data will be purged after 30 days. So I understand people's concerns about privacy issues, but I think that what the purpose of these cameras in this system will not invade people's privacy, nor will it keep any information that could be used for fraud or some other illegitimate purpose. One of the reasons that we are doing it is we talked the Police Community Engagement Board, trying to look at some solutions for proactive measures to fight the car theft and theft from autos. This is one of those things that we can do. It adds to our human resources by allowing us to have basically 6 people looking at cars coming into the city. If there's a hit on the plate that comes through, and again, it's just a plate reader, doesn't look at people, doesn't identify anyone or any car information other than hits on plates that are stolen or commission of felonies. If it comes into the city, it'll automatically notify one of the officers or all the officers on the MDT, so we'll know that somebody is coming into the city, probably with either the intent of committing a crime or have just committed a crime. So we feel it's a good tool to leverage the technology to help us combat these issues. We believe it's a reasonable cost in comparison to what the costs are for other cities and other venues. We negotiated a pretty good settlement with it. We also applied for a state grant that will pay for $20,000, which is almost 50% of the purchase, the contract purchase.
So Chief, you saw the questions that came from Councilmember Hickson Shepherd, which I think you've covered almost all of them. The one I think maybe that you didn't mention that is worth, I think, noting for the public is the storage of the data happens where and how.
The storage is in the Amazon Web Service Cloud. It has, I forget, I'm not a technophobe, so I think it's AES 215 or 256 encryption from end to end. So it meets all of the CJIS, DoD requirements. It is safe. It's what the military uses to store information. Again, there's no guarantee of nothing ever being hacked, but it's as secure as information can possibly be. So we're at a fairly high level of confidence that a hack or a data breach isn't going to occur. If it does, it's not going to get too much information because it's all purged after 30 days. And the only information we'll be getting is the license plates that were read on the system, which unless someone has access to Department of Revenue for either the state or for other states, is pretty much useless.
Anyone else have questions? Oh, yes, please go ahead.
So this is actually to assist in addressing the high level of car thefts and things that are occurring, not only in our city, but nationwide, actually. But so if we get a hit on one of these, what's the process? What happens?
If the
If
system gets a hit on the
reads and
plate,
it's
it automatically
stolen
sends it.
vehicle.
Yeah, it automatically sends out to our officers that a car that's stolen with the description of the car and the license plate is entered into the city. Typically, what happens when somebody comes in a stolen car or with a car that's committed a felony, they're here to do additional crimes. So the officers that are on duty at that time can now look for the car, knowing it's here, knowing where it entered from, and would have a chance of at least preventing or being proactive about it.
Do we have what's our policy in terms of car chasing and,
We have a very strong pursuit policy. And the pursuit policy is we do not pursue unless there's deadly force was used in the commission of a crime. That's one of the, again, it's one of the discussions we've had quite a bit in terms of staff and with the public and with the police community engagement board. That is, people coming in know that we don't chase for those types of crimes. So, I mean, that's an additional problem, an additional layer. There have been several occasions where officers have interrupted a theft or whether from a car or from a car, have followed the car and it's taken off and we don't pursue. So that's a separate issue. But this would at least help us know somebody's coming in and we should be looking for them and at least stop it from occurring.
Chief, does adding this equipment to the Webster Groves Police Department arsenal increase public safety in Webster Groves, do you believe?
I believe that it will. One of the things that, again, I talked to Dr. Peoples about this. It's a 3-year commitment. What we want to do is see if as advertised, I mean, it's a fairly new tool. There's several other cities that have it. I know several of them that have had success with it. I think it will help us be successful in fighting that crime. But after 3 years, we'll take a look at it and reassess it. If it's not cost efficient or cost effective, we won't renew the contract.
Thank you, Chief.
What municipalities around us have it, Chief?
Brentwood has it, Clayton has it, Maplewood has them, Shrewsbury has them, Kirkwood has them. Those are the ones that are immediately around us.
So it'll be almost pre-notification before they hit Webster.
Right, we've had, what happens is if we would get a hit or somebody in another city gets a hit, we've had calls from other cities saying, we've had a car come through that was a stolen auto, et cetera, with and giving us the information on it. Generally, it's in that city at the time, so we're not going to see it, but at least we're aware of it. So yes, it's a regional, it'll help regionally. We have access to ours. We can communicate that. Again, it's a proprietary system. Flock is not going to share that information with Brentwood or Maplewood or Kirkwood, but we can share it. If a car's coming through, we can broadcast that this car is coming through.
Good. Thank you.
All right, any other questions or comments? All right, let's have the vote, please.
Yes, Mayor. Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
And I probably should have done this before the vote, but I'd like to have us include Chief Curtis's memo as part of the minutes for the meeting.
Yes. Thank you.
All right. Councilmember Franklin, will you call for the passage of resolution 2023-10, please?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I'd like to call for the passage of resolution number 2023-10.
Second.
Is there any discussion? This is directly related, so. All right, let's have the vote then, please.
Mayor Arnold,
Yes.
Councilmember Bliss.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
All right, we have made one appointment to a board and commission. That is Jill Magruder to the Police Community Engagement Board. And I believe we do have another closed session. Would you like to go ahead and call for the closed session?
Yes, Mayor, I'd like to call for a closed session related to attorney-client privilege communications, Missouri statute 610.021, open friends, one closed friends.
Gentlemen, our meeting is still going on. If you'd like to converse, please do so outside. Thank you.
And personnel, Missouri statute 610.021, open friends, three closed friends.
Second.
Councilmember Bliss,
Yes.
Councilmember Franklin.
Yes.
Councilmember Smith,
Yes.
Councilmember Alexander.
Yes.
Mayor Arnold.
Yes. All right.